And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of the Doing the Work podcast. As tonight, we welcome Kyle Huesmann from Hawkeye Report to give us a preview of the Hawkeyes and the Big Ten in general, and we'll also ask him his thoughts about the Indiana Hoosiers. I'm your host, Jeff Marlow, and my co-host, Kathy Amos, had a family issue come up this evening and this afternoon, so she won't be able to join us, but Kathy will be back with us on our next show as we go forward into the season. This is the newest show on the Back Home Network dedicated to covering IU women's basketball. As we do most shows, we start our show with our banner moment. Tonight's banner moment occurred earlier today when the Hoosiers came in ranked at number 11 in the WBCA Women's Basketball Coaches Association preseason poll. It is their 41st consecutive week in the WBCA poll. IU's non-conference opponents, Tennessee, came in 4th, North Carolina 12th in the preseason poll. In the Big Ten, Iowa, and we'll talk to Kyle a little bit about the preseason ranking as well, tied for 6th with UConn. Ohio State was 15th, Maryland 18th, Nebraska 22nd, and Michigan was 23rd. So Big Ten, the top part of the Big Ten, pretty well represented in the preseason poll. Our banner moment is sponsored by Home Field Apparel. Home Field is constantly releasing new schools or updating their products for schools in their existing line. You are bound to find something for you or as a gift as we near the holiday season. They even have a core line with no schools or teams if you have family or friends who just want a high quality sweatshirt. So whether you want only IU gear or other college teams and now NFL or nothing associated with a team, Home Field probably has something for you. Go to homefieldapparel.com and use our promo code HOME, H-O-M-E, to get 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME for 15% off. Once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. And now let's introduce our guest for the evening, Kyle Huesmann of Hawkeye Report. Kyle, as we welcome you to the show, you're, as we said, we're talking off screen a little bit, you're our first guest from outside the Hoosier family. So welcome to Doing the Work.
Yeah, thanks for picking me to be the first one outside of the Indiana area to be on the show. I'm happy to be on, talk about some women's basketball, obviously. Yeah, it should be a good time.
Yeah, we look forward to talking to you especially about the Hawkeyes, but the Big Ten race in general, and a little bit about how maybe some of the Iowa perspective on the Indiana Hoosiers is. So, Kyle, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and to the Doing the Work podcast?
Yeah, I just graduated Iowa in May. I'm doing sports journalism with Hawkeye Report. Kind of got lucky, as I was telling you, the way it kind of worked out. Got into sports and recreation management, my major at Iowa, and tried to interview for the Daily Iowan, the student-run newspaper. Unfortunately, didn't get that. And as I told you before this, Tom just gave me a chance really to do stuff, cover Iowa baseball during the COVID year. It worked out. He let me do women's basketball, and now here I am with a full-time job with him. So yeah, I'm just happy that Tom, gave me a chance. I think we would both say that it worked out really well. And yeah, hopefully it keeps going for a while.
And for our listeners, Hawkeye Report is part of the Rivals Network. So if you have access to Rivals, you could probably see some of Kyle's work on Hawkeye Report. And Kyle, I don't want to say luck, but you've really benefited at the time. Iowa baseball has been pretty good. And of course, the Iowa women have been very good.
Yeah, I've joked that I'm happy that my teams that I cover, field hockey, women's basketball, and baseball, are good. With the way that football is going right now, I don't have to worry about the tough side of that right now. But yeah, I've been happy with the teams that I've got. All the coaches that I get to talk to are great as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge key for anybody who's doing any journalism is access that you can get with the coaches and such, and that obviously makes the job a little bit easier. So let's kind of dig into the basketball part of it. And obviously preseason practice Iowa. When does Iowa begin? I'm sure they have an exhibition game probably coming up soon.
Yeah, they actually last Saturday they had a closed scrimmage with DePaul. Okay. I believe they're supposed to be a pretty good team this year from what I heard. They have a preseason All-American on the team. And then they play here on Friday in their exhibition that fans are allowed to come to. They play Division II Nebraska Kearney. And then November 7th is their season opener against Southern.
So yeah, and I know Indiana is about the same time frame there. Is there any way for you to describe? I mean, this is a team, Iowa, we're talking about, that has the preseason player of the year by all respects, and Caitlin Clark has everybody back. And Lisa Bluter, for my money, is one of the best coaches in the Big Ten. Is there any way to kind of, to let our describe for our listeners what the anticipation is for this season in Iowa City?
I mean, yeah, it's hard to describe the fan excitement. Something that I think you haven't seen necessarily in a while. Um, Iowa Women's basketball has always been a well supported sport at Iowa, but I think this year you're seeing it kick up a little bit more. Part of it's because of Caitlin Clark. Part of it's because players like Monica Sonano or McKenna Warnock, Kate Martin, the players that are around Caitlin. And the other thing is last year just being able to sell out a couple of games. I think there were a lot of fans that were a lot of Iowa fans that were sold on women's basketball. So the anticipation for the season is incredible. For the team itself, I think they kind of dealt with these expectations last year because they were ranked highly. Obviously, the season didn't go the way they wanted to, but to have everybody back, I think Lisa put it perfectly. There's no reason not to have high expectations this year for what they have back, what they brought in. And then where they are in the rankings, everybody thinks that they should be this high, and I would agree that I think that all the expectations go right with the way they should be.
You watched them last year quite a bit as you were covering them for the full season. And when you watch Caitlin Clark, what in your opinion just makes her? I mean, obviously a great talent, but what makes her such a special talent? Can you kind of pinpoint it?
I think the thing that stands out to me, everybody knows about, the pulling up from the logo, the 3-pointers, the, scoring 30, 40 points in a game. But I think the thing that stands out to me is maybe something that people don't always see because, they're not tweeting out, the assists to Monica Sonana or the assists to other teammates. A lot of the videos that are tweeted about are her shooting from the logo. And as it is, because that's exciting. But she led the nation in scoring last year, but she also led the nation in assists. So that's the thing that stands out to me is that she's able to be a superstar and score a lot of points, but also do things for her team, get assists, get other baskets in different ways. Something that you don't always see from someone like that.
And along with that, go back to maybe the Creighton game. Was there something Creighton did special that kind of slowed her down, or was it just an off night for Caitlin Clark in that NCAA tournament game?
I think part of it actually is the fact that those two teams had for a while had scrimmaged before the season. That closed scrimmage that we were talking about, it had been Creighton. So part of that is that in those scrimmages, teams are trying different things. They're doing different defenses, different offenses. And I think part of that is the reason why Creighton was able to defend her so well is because they had that time before the season to throw different things at her, things that maybe you didn't do in a game because you didn't know if they were going to work. So they had that kind of early period where they got to see her. But yeah, I think the thing that you have to do and that they did in that game is they were physical with her at times. And the refs just can't call it and they're not going to call it every single time down the floor. That's just the way it is. So if you can fluster her that way, and that's what they did. And then the other thing that happened was the rebounding just didn't help Iowa in that game. I mean, Creighton's a guard heavy team and they were able to out rebound Iowa, which just can't happen. But yeah, I think there's different things that teams try to do. And the first one is just being physical with Caitlin because they know that the referees aren't going to call it every time. They're not going to call 40 fouls in a game.
And that said, I mean, it was only a 2-point game. I mean, that was a game that I didn't see it. I happened to be in Spain on a school trip during the NCAA tournament last year, so I didn't get to see any of the IU run to the Sweet 16. Didn't see the Iowa team lose in the second round. So, but I'm assuming in a 2-point game, they probably had some chances down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, they were trailing in the second half. They made a comeback and took the lead, and it kind of felt. I mean, the crowd was a sellout crowd. Crowd was going crazy. It felt like I was going to escape this, and then it was actually former Hawkeye Lauren Jensen transferred to Creighton. She hits the big shot at the end, and then it comes down the final possession. Iowa has a shot. They get it to Monica Sonano. It's a shot that she said. We just talked to her during media day. She said it's a shot she's made thousands of times, and it just didn't happen to go in. And that I think that's just the NCAA tournament for you. There's plays like that. There's upsets like that are going to happen. But yeah, they're ready to go. They're ready to turn the page for this year. And I think they're using kind of that last game as motivation for this year.
And that kind of leads me to my next question I had for you is they may not say it out loud around the program, but as somebody who follows the team on a regular basis, do you get a sense that they feel like there's some unfinished business from last year for this year?
Oh yeah. I mean, Caitlin talked about it last year. The goal was to make a Final Four, an Elite Eight at least. And they didn't even make it to the Sweet 16 because of that upset. The one thing that has stood out is that Creighton game, whether it should have happened earlier or not, because they struggled with rebounding throughout the season. But that getting out rebounded by Creighton is really, really stuck with them. It sounds like, Rebounding has been a focus all off season. So I think that in itself to improve in that area definitely came from that loss against Creighton. But anytime you're a 1, 2, 3 seed and you get knocked out in the first round or the second round of the tournament, and then you bring back all those players again, I think always you're going to feel like that there's some unfinished business. And I know this team, with the number 4 AP poll ranking and the number 6 coaches poll ranking, I think they absolutely believe that they're good enough to, make a Sweet 16 and then take the next step, get to an Elite 8 or potentially a Final 4.
And you mentioned something that was kind of that for IU last year, the games they struggled in were games they struggled to rebound. Michigan, Iowa to a certain degree, Nebraska on the road. So it's interesting because I see Monica Sonato, and I can't imagine Iowa struggling to rebound. So was that an issue for them kind of all through the year in games that were tight games or that they lost, or did it just kind of rear its ugly head in one specific game that was in the middle of the NCAA tournament?
No, I think rebounding and then defense in general has been something that's kind of hurt Iowa over the last couple of years, and they've improved on it. They improved defensively last year. During the 2020 season, they were last in the nation in defense. They allowed 80 points a game. Last year was up to 70, so they made market improvement there. And then the rebounding was a little bit better. There were a couple of injuries throughout the season that didn't help. And a couple of players that are fully back. Sharon Goodman's one that missed the entire season last year with an ACL injury. She's back. She should be able to help the rebounding. But yeah, rebounding throughout the season was something that kept other teams in games, whether it was getting a lot of rebounds and making the defense more tired, or getting a lot of rebounds and they were converting them for points. But it seemed like in a lot of the close games, it was because they were getting rebounds, whether it was second, third, fourth opportunity. And if they can clean that up, all those close games, even the close wins can become, comfortable 10-point wins, and maybe even the close losses can become wins.
And Kyle, we were kind of talking about her. As much notoriety and as much fanfare that Caitlin Clark gets, and rightfully so, she is a special talent. Is Monica Sonato kind of the key to this team?
I don't know that I would say there's a real key to this team. The thing I would say about Monica is that she doesn't necessarily get the national recognition that I think she should get. I've told people, I've talked to Tom when we were on the podcast recently, that I think Monica Sonato, from a pure standpoint of putting the ball in the basket in the paint, I don't know that you're going to find someone better in women's basketball or men's basketball. Last year, over the last 7-8 games, at one point she was something like 78 of 100 from the floor, which is just incredible. But, this offense is going to be good this year. They're going to score a lot of points. I would say the key to this team is again, as it's been the last couple of years, would be defense and rebounding. But yeah, I think if you take really anyone out of the Iowa offense, whether it's Monica or Caitlin, which would be the two biggest ones, if you really lose anyone at any point, it's going to hurt this team. And you saw it last year at times. McKenna Warnock missed a couple of games. Gabby Marshall missed a couple of games. And you saw the team struggle a little bit at that point. So I think everyone in the starting five, and even some bench players, they all play their role. They all have a key to this team. I wouldn't say anyone is a true key. The biggest thing is just staying healthy.
And I will say this, that you look at Iowa's roster, this is about a veteran roster as really any team, especially with the same team. IU's got some vets, and we'll talk a little bit about the Hoosiers in a few minutes, and get your perspective on them. But you look at that Iowa roster, those kids have been together in that program for a while. I know she's added a few, a couple transfers and stuff, but you look at that roster, it's loaded with vets.
Oh yeah. I don't know that I've ever heard of a team, having the same exact starting five for 3 straight seasons, but that's what Iowa has. And then of course they go into the transfer portal this year. Like you mentioned, they bring in Molly Davis from Central Michigan. She's already got 3 years of experience there. So yeah, the experience on this team is just off the charts. It's not really something that you see too often. A big part of it can be attributed to the way that COVID has kind of worked out with some extra years in there. And actually, I believe Iowa could bring back a handful of their starters again next year if they wanted to. We'll have to see how that plays out. But yeah, very experienced team. They've been through a lot, and I think that's going to help a lot this season.
And so as somebody, again, covering the Hawkeyes for Hawkeye Report, and we're glad to have Kyle Huesmann from the Hawkeye Report with us as our guest on the Doing the Work podcast. Let me rephrase that. Let me phrase it better. You obviously think Iowa's going to win the big, or you think they've got the best shot to win the Big Ten. Who do you see as their main rivals in the conference race?
I think it would be Indiana and Ohio State. I think both of those teams return enough to be the top two. Again, yeah, I do think Iowa's probably the favorite, but I definitely wouldn't say that they're an overwhelming favorite. I think there's two very good teams right there in Indiana and Ohio State. Maryland's another team that you would expect to be up there, just the way they've been, through the last few since they've joined the Big Ten. But they're a little bit different. I'm sure we'll kind of get into some of the other teams, and I can explain more. But their roster is completely different from last year. So if I had to pick two teams, it would probably be Indiana and Ohio State. That would be the ones that have a chance to knock Iowa off.
And let's kind of talk. What do you think of? Let's start with the Buckeyes. We'll start with them first. What do you think of the Buckeyes?
I
hate to, but from our listeners who missed last week or 2 weeks ago, we talked a little bit about Ohio State. They get one of their key players back who missed all of last year with an injury. So that team is going to be a little bit different than the one they had last year.
Yeah, I think just from a guard standpoint, having J.C. Sheldon and Taylor Mikesell back is really, they could arguably be the two best, the best guard duo in the Big Ten. And just the players that they have around them, they return a lot, like you said, getting a player back from injury. They seem to have. They only played Iowa one time last year. It was a really intense game, a kind of a physical game, and it flustered Iowa, I think. But yeah, I think they have the players, the talent to make a run at the Big Ten title again. They tied for the Big Ten title last year with Iowa. It's really close between Indiana and Ohio State, who I would take as the second best team. And
then let's talk. What do you think of the Hoosiers?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm trying to pull up there. There it is. Grace Berger and Mackenzie Holmes back is obviously the two big ones. The thing that intrigues me the most about Indiana is the transfers that they brought in. Sarah Scally was someone that I really liked at Minnesota last year, the way she shoots the ball, the way that she can score the ball. I think that's a huge addition for Indiana. And then, you bring in a couple others, Sydney Parrish from Oregon. I know she's not as experienced as Scally may, but still a very talented recruit out of high school. And then the Providence transfer, Alyssa Geary, I think is going to end up being a big addition as well. So I think Indiana is a little bit different because there are a couple of transfers that you're not entirely sure how long maybe it takes to gel them into the team. But those five there that I just mentioned, if you put those, if that ends up being a starting five, I think that's a really good starting five.
Well, and go back to what we talked about Iowa starting the same group now for the third year in a row. As somebody now in your second year, is it going to be a little strange not to see Allie Patberg and Alexa Golbey and Nikki Cardano-Hillary step out in an IU uniform?
Yeah, whenever you have a team that has a starter for multiple years and then all of a sudden they're gone, it's kind of weird. From an Iowa standpoint, I would say someone like Jordan Bohannon for Iowa, it's going to be weird this year when he does not walk out on the court for the season opener or even the exhibition game. But yeah, whenever a team has, a multi-year starter and they're gone, you always wonder, how are we going to be able to fill that spot? And it's always weird. But like I said, I think Indiana did a really good job of filling what they thought were the holes on the team.
And the Big Ten is hoping very much that final Sunday in February in Iowa City between IU and Iowa has some type of Big Ten ramifications in play for the TV audience. I guess kind of a question we had, and I was going to maybe bring it up a little bit later, Kyle, but you mentioned talk about the fan base. Right now, Iowa women are outselling the men. A lot of their games are either sold out right now or very few seats left. So just kind of maybe talk a little bit about what kind of environment it is for their teams coming into Carver Hawkeye Arena.
Yeah, it sounds like as of yesterday, I believe they were over 6,000 season tickets sold. I would expect multiple sellouts this year. There haven't been any yet, but the season hasn't even started yet. A lot of the big games are still a month away. They sold out 3 games last year, and you talked about the potential of having Indiana and Iowa being the top 2 down the stretch this year. Last year, that last game of the season was Iowa-Michigan. If Iowa won, they tied for the Big Ten title. If Michigan won, they were going to get the Big Ten title outright, and Iowa sells out Carver. I've told a lot of people that is by far and away the best basketball atmosphere I've ever seen at Carver. There were a couple of wrestling duels that were better. But yeah, from a basketball standpoint, that's one of the best crowds that I've ever seen at Carver. And it's definitely a difference maker. And then during the NCAA tournament, they sold out 2 games too. And those environments were great as well. So, like I told you earlier, that I feel like a lot of people were sold. There were a lot of people that came to those games because it was a big game. and maybe to see Caitlin Clark. But I think a lot of people were sold on the Iowa women's basketball team coming to those games, and that's why there's going to be so much fan support this year.
Yeah, for those of you who are watching the live YouTube feed, my puppy has gotten something that's got his attention. So I should say, is barking up a storm for anybody who hears my puppy in the background. Yeah, and I just, to me, I coach basketball here in Indiana for about 25 years, both boys and girls. And a big crowd that's energetic can really make a difference. And I would assume that was that case with Iowa and Michigan at the end of the season last year.
Yeah, I mean, you could see it from when people filing in before the game. I'm always at the game, 90 minutes early, which is 30 minutes before fans start to come in. And you could tell, as the team was warming up, the team, jogs out together for their warm-ups or whatever. The crowd was already energized. The players talked about it after the game, how they were getting chills just running onto the court for warm-ups. And they talked about how much that can help you. I mean, if you get on a string of 5, 10 points or whatever in a row, I mean, the crowd's standing, the crowd's cheering, it's loud, it's hard to hear if you're the other team. Absolutely. I mean, that's not an Iowa thing. That's just a sports in general. When you have a home crowd behind you, it's definitely a difference maker.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. So let's move on. Let's talk. What are your thoughts about Maryland?
Yeah, I said in my season preview article for Iowa when I was looking at doing a game by game breakdown. Maryland's what I would call a real wild card this year in the Big Ten. They had 5 players averaging double figures a year ago, and just one of them's left on the roster. It's Diamond Miller, averaged 13 points a game last year. They brought in a bunch of people from the transfer portal, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It's going to be something that could be really. I mean, their early season schedule. I know their non-conference schedule is really tough, and that could be even tougher for them if they're trying to their first games out on the court with potentially a brand new starting 5. Of players that haven't been on the team. So, I mean, the transfers they brought in were good. I know Abby Myers, the Ivy League Player of the Year, comes in from Princeton. They brought in, 3 players that are very experienced and averaging double figures at their respective schools last year. But you never know what's going to happen when you bring in that many new players, and we'll have to see. Like I said, they're like the wild card team where if everything gels and goes well, they could be a very good team. If things don't go well, they don't gel early in the year, they could lose a lot of games. Maybe they'll pick it up before Big Ten play. But just a team that you really can't put a finger on what they could do this year. And Brenda Fries is a very experienced coach, good coach, and they've been good since they joined the Big Ten. So I'm sure they'll be right up there in the Big Ten standings. But as for contending for the crown, it's hard to decide if they can or not.
Yeah, and I agree. I think when you saw some of the people who left in the spring, your first thoughts were, what's going on at Maryland? But then Brenda Fries goes out and she finds some quality people in the transfer portal. And IU fans are very aware of Abby Myers. She was the one who almost beat IU in the second round here at Assembly Hall in that game with Princeton in the second round after they'd beaten Kentucky Princeton had beaten Kentucky in round 1, which I will remind our fans that last year in our tournament preview, I had picked Princeton to beat Kentucky in that game, but I didn't know they'd give IU such a game. But I agree with you. I think they are a wild card, but you look at their schedule, their non-conference schedule, and I can't remember it all off the top of my head, but it's a South Carolina, it's a UConn, a Baylor, and I know I'm missing somebody else in there. And I think they also have DePaul. We talked about Maryland's schedule a little bit. Doug Bruno is an excellent coach at DePaul. Now, DePaul may not win that game, but I wouldn't be shocked if they did. With Maryland. And then and one of the things that I want to talk with you a little bit about this in a little bit, but if you look at like Maryland's last 6 games in the Big Ten, it's pretty brutal. So I think scheduling will play a role. And we're going to talk about the Big Ten race, obviously, as we're going through some of the teams. I'll get your predictions, but I think schedule is going to be a huge deal. I thought that was one of the things last year that IU kind of got caught with the COVID shutdown there, and then they had to play a ton of games. I think it was 6 games in 12 days, twice with Iowa, basically within 3 days. It didn't do them any favors, and it was what it was. You had to play the games the way they end up being scheduled. But I thought the schedule really played out well. And you talk about Ohio State, they only got Iowa once. They won that game, and technically they were the number 1 seed of the Big Ten tournament, even though they shared the title. So yeah, that Maryland schedule is brutal, and I totally agree with you that they'll either get through that early part of the non-conference schedule and find themselves, or it could be a little bit, I almost, when I say struggle for Maryland, they're 4th or 5th in the league. They're I don't see them going to 9th. All right. So at least that's my opinion.
I'm looking at the schedule here now. I got, South Carolina, Baylor, DePaul, Notre Dame's on there, and then Connecticut. It's a tough schedule, but I think I think the thing that could help there is when you're playing good teams, you're gonna have to figure it out quickly with those transfers. So even if they lose a couple of those games, I think they're gonna be real big for building chemistry with that team. So even if even if they lose, I don't know how many games I mentioned there. If they lose 3 of them, that could potentially, it might not matter. They might get into Big Ten play and get things rolling. So, with that many transfers, you wonder, do you want a tough schedule to test this team to see where they're at? Do you want an easier schedule so you can get through it with some wins? I mean, I don't think that the challenges are going to be a bad thing for a team with a lot of new players.
Yeah, you raise an excellent point there. So let's talk about Nebraska, and because Nebraska's ranked in the preseason poll. They were a team that beat Indiana in Lincoln last year and played well against us here in Bloomington. Excuse me. So what are your thoughts about the Cornhuskers?
Yeah, I think this is a team that's kind of, I wouldn't say underrated because they're ranked, but it's a team that, they're not the Iowa, they're not the Indiana, they're not Ohio State, and even Maryland's ranked pretty highly, even though we just talked about kind of the way that they could be put together this season. But Nebraska's kind of sitting there as the 4th ranked Big Ten team, right there where Michigan is. And I think Nebraska's going to be a really good team this year. Jazz Shelley's back, great guard for them. Big Ten freshman of the year, Alexis Markowski's back. I like her. I think she's very good as well. I remember the game at Nebraska last year, Iowa player. She made like 7 3-pointers, and it was just she'd made like four up to that point in the season. It was crazy to see her do that. But I think she's going to have a really big year after last season. Isabel Bourne's back, a good forward for them. The big loss, it was a starter, Sam Hybe. She's out with an injury this year. But I will say they brought in Maddie Kroll, a guard from South Dakota, a tournament team last year. So I'm interested to see where she fits in, if she's a starter, if she's someone off the bench. But like I said, I think Nebraska's going to be a really good team. Maybe they aren't thought of as being up there with those top 3 teams, but they'll definitely compete.
I think they're a team that can they may not win the league, but I don't think it'll shock anybody if they beat good teams in Lincoln, an IU or an Iowa or an Ohio State. I don't think it'll shock anybody because that's how good they could be. I'm just not sure they can do it consistently enough throughout the season, at least that, in my opinion. They have an interesting recruit, and I can't think of her name right now, but who's also playing volleyball right now. But it was like, I want to say out of Colorado, that was like the Colorado Player of the Year or some, maybe it was out, but I can't think of her name. But so they got pieces, and I thought that Nebraska was a team last year that was on the rise, and I still kind of feel that way. I just don't think they're quite to that elite where Iowa and IU and Ohio State are right now in the league. I totally agree with you there. What do you think about Michigan? I thought they might drop off a little bit more, but the coaches got them in the top 25.
Yeah, and the AP poll has them at 25 too. I think it's hard to decide because I believe they bring back 4 starters, if I'm not mistaken. Leia Brown's back. She averaged in double figures last year. Maddie Nolan's a great 3-point shooter. Like I said, I think they bring back 4 starters, but the big question is Naz Hillman's gone. I mean, she averaged 21 points a game last year, was an All-American. It's always hard when you lose someone like that to put a finger on how good they're going to be when you lose a player like that. Their new center I shouldn't say that's coming in. The replacement, Isabel Verjao, 2.1 points per game last year. So is she going to be the one is she going to make a big jump this year? Or are you going to have to hope that someone else can make a big jump in average, the 20 points or something like that? So again, that could be one of those things that has to get hashed out early in the season, and maybe Michigan struggles early. But yeah, right now, I think there are other teams in the Big Ten. I would put Nebraska ahead of Michigan right now. I'm not as high on Michigan. I don't know as much outside of the Big Ten as other people do, obviously the AP poll voters. But I thought Michigan could be unranked. But yeah, I think they're good enough to be a ranked team. It's just a matter of how they replace Naz Hillman.
And then one last team I want to talk with you about, because I really think there's a divide. I think you have your top 6 or 7 in the Big Ten, and then there's a real divide there. So I'm not going to get too deep into the league. What do you think of Purdue?
Yeah, Purdue's one that I was really, really had, and I wouldn't say a tough time picking the game when I was going through my season prediction, but kind of my little paragraph that I wrote, I was having a hard time trying to say how good this Purdue team could be. Because, like you said, there's the top, top 5, 6, whatever in the Big Ten. Then there's really a big drop off where, I mean, Michigan's ranked. And after that, you wonder, is there another NCAA tournament team from the Big Ten? Purdue made the WNIT last year, and they return all 5 starters, which is, similar to Iowa, not obviously 3 years in a row, but another team that returns everybody that played significant minutes last year. And then they brought in a couple of players from the transfer portal. Brought in Rutgers forward Lasha Pitre. She averaged 8 points a game last year. Brought in the WAC Player of the Year from California Baptist, Caitlin Harper. She averaged 14 points and 6 boards. I think Katie Gerald's has got this team going the right way. I will say the last sentence that I put in my prediction for Purdue was that it's going to be a tricky game and this team's going the right direction. I think Iowa wins because it's in Iowa City. But Purdue's a team that maybe they don't win a lot of big games. Maybe they get an upset somewhere in West Lafayette. That's going to be a pretty good team. I would think that they're going to be potential. I haven't looked at their schedule, so I don't know if it's really tough. Maybe they can't get into the NCAA tournament. But I think they could be in the discussion.
Yeah, I agree. And I think they're a bubble team. If you're looking right now at the way too early bracketology, to me, they possibly are a bubble team. But I agree with you. I think the Katie Gerald's has them moving in the right direction. I saw Katie play in high school back in the day here in Indiana, followed her at Purdue a little bit with her career and watched her as a star there. But and she's made just last year alone, Mackey Arena became a tough place to play again for the Purdue women. It kind of got to the point where it wasn't like when I was like when Lynn Dunn was there and Carolyn Peck was there and Christy Curry were there, you knew going in there it was going to take something special to win. It kind of gotten away from that with I've gone dead here on with the previous coach. And so I thought Katie got that back a little bit. The IU game, IU was lucky to get out of there last year with a win because it was a tough environment, got the game into overtime and then was able to win it. But I totally agree with you. I think they're kind of a bubble team. And I think that they're a team that, you never know. You just might beat somebody in West Lafayette that's at kind of the top if they're not playing their A game. I think that's the other thing. Purdue probably needs a team like Iowa, Indiana, Ohio State, maybe even Maryland that has to be off their A game a little bit and then, pull that upset. So just real quick, Kyle, or if you want to go a little deeper with it, how do you see, let's say, the top 6 in the Big Ten?
Oh, man, it's so tough because we talked about there's those top 3. I would say it's really kind of like a top 3, leaving Maryland out for now because there's just a little not sure on them. I would say the top 3. I don't know that I'm going to pick an order, I guess. I would just say Iowa and Ohio State are going to be the top 3. I think any of those 3 could win it just because, the way, we see it with any conference. You get down to the end of the season, and it's just, one game separates a team or two, whether the matchup, like you said, at Iowa, Indiana could be the game at the end of the year that decides it. But I think Iowa, Indiana, Ohio State are those top 3. I think Maryland definitely could get into that conversation. But then I would say your next 3 would probably be Maryland, Nebraska, and Michigan. Probably Maryland right now for this moment. I would say Maryland and Nebraska would be the next 2. Your 4, 5, Michigan at 6, and I would put Purdue in the conversation to possibly jump into there. Right now, I'd have them at 7 though. But like you said, I think that's definitely a team that could upset someone. Can they get into the top 6? I'm not sure. But yeah, I would say it's really kind of a top 3, and then the next 3, and then you drop off a bit after that.
Yeah, and real quick, I think this is kind of alluded to it earlier. You look at Indiana and Iowa, their schedules down the stretch, and Iowa especially, since you follow them, they've got IU twice, and then I was trying to look at their schedule real quick. They've got IU twice in the last 6 games, and then they also have Nebraska and Maryland. So there's 4 games right there for the Hawkeyes against kind of the top of the league. And then Ohio State has Maryland twice. And I'm trying to remember, Indiana's in there, Michigan, and then they play Maryland twice. Sorry, they play Maryland twice and Indiana once, and Michigan once. So if you're looking schedule-wise down the stretch, Ohio State may have the benefit. Now, I'm not talking about the first part. They may have a really tough part of the first schedule, but man, to me, those 3 teams, those last 6 games, I think are really going to determine who shakes out at the top.
And that's really how it went last year. Iowa made a really big run in those last couple of weeks to kind of jump. At one point, Iowa was projected like an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, and then they went on that run, and all of a sudden they're tied for the Big Ten regular season title. You talked about Iowa's schedule with Indiana there, and then I know their last 3 games, as you mentioned, they get Nebraska, Maryland, and Indiana. Depending on how you look at it, that can be good, that can be bad. You don't necessarily want to have all those good games at the same time. But from the other standpoint, you can go into those last, 6 games of the season and say, all right, here's where we sit in the standings. we play all these teams again. Maybe I was in the lead in the conference, and they say, all right, Indiana's right there. We have them twice, so we beat them, and we're going to win the conference. Or maybe I was sitting there and they're a couple games back or a game back, and they go, all right, we still have Indiana, we still have Maryland there. We can still pick up a game. So, I mean, depending on how you look at it, maybe you want some of those good teams down the stretch, so that way if you're behind or ahead, you kind of control your own destiny and don't have to worry about rooting for a team to lose somewhere. But yeah, I mean, the schedule works out the way it works out, and we saw last year that, I mean, any team can make a run at the end of the season. Last year was Iowa that made the big run to tie for the regular season title.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I look at it from the former coaching perspective. If you can get hot, if you can be playing well at the end against that schedule, that should carry you into tournament play. Theoretically, from a coaching perspective. But again, we all know that every game is its own game as well. So as Iowa fans know from the Creighton game during the NCAA tournament, and IU fans know with the UConn game, they went out to stores went out to Connecticut, I shouldn't say stores, but went to UConn, basically played a road game at UConn in the NCAA tournament, and UConn played well and won that game. But, a lot of IU fans felt like if they could have gotten that game at a neutral site, maybe it'd been a little different. So that's just not the way the NCAA tournament works for the most part. It will this year, though. That's one thing. Do you have anything you want to say about the way the tournament's going to be run this year? In fact, that the regionals are going to kind of two sites.
Yeah, I'm personally not a fan, just from the standpoint that you talk about, I mean, Seattle and Greensboro, you're opposite sides of the country. That still plays into the hands of maybe South Carolina is going to be right there if they make it. North Carolina is going to have a good team. So if they make the Sweet 16, they could potentially be in Greensboro, depending on how the bracket breaks out. And Oregon is another one that could benefit from it being in Seattle. But to me, the fact that there's nothing in the Midwest area, or even in the South, I mean, from Texas all the way up to Iowa, there's just going to be nothing. There's not going to be an NCAA tournament or a Sweet 16 game there. So you talk about if Iowa goes to the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight, I mean, the travel is going to be impossible for Iowa fans. I mean, they'll still do it. I'm sure other teams. I mean, if Indiana makes it, they'll travel as well, I'm sure. But I'm just not a fan of the two-site thing. I know it's to try to get better attendance. But I don't think the answer to better attendance is cutting out the entire middle of the country. So like I said, I'm not necessarily a fan of it. I get why they did it, because they want to boost attendance. But I think if certain teams get into a couple of those spots, I don't think they're going to see the attendance boost that they want.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm not a fan of it. I can't imagine they would do it for the men's tournament this way. And that's kind of an issue I have, having been coaching girls basketball in Indiana. It's like, why are we doing something different with the women that we wouldn't do with the men? But, oh, well. But I think I'm hopeful maybe they'll be like, maybe this wasn't the best idea, and we'll see them go back in the future. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Kyle. And so who would be on your preseason Big Ten team? And you're not going to offend anybody. You're not offending me.
I didn't prepare for that, so I'm not ready. I mean, if you had to go, what are we going to do? 3 guards, a forward, and a center. Caitlin Clark would obviously be a guard, and I would have Monica Sano at center. The other guards, man, there's so many good ones. We talked about a lot of them. I think you would have to put probably JC Sheldon on there. I'm just scrolling through my preview here. I mean, there's so many guards. McKenna Marisa at Penn State's one that we haven't even mentioned. Taylor Mikesell at Ohio State. Jazz Shelley, obviously Grace Berger. Sarah Scally is another one that I said I'm a big fan of as well. Maybe
I should expand it out past 5.
I'm not really answering the question. I'm just naming a bunch of names now. I just think that the guard position is very talented here in the Big Ten. But yeah, I mean, I just mentioned a whole bunch of guards. I think any of them could get into that spot. And maybe that's the reason why for women's basketball, the Big Ten, the preseason All Big Ten team is like 12 names because they want to include all of them. But yeah, I think all those names that I just mentioned and even others. I mean, there's other players in the Big Ten that you can afford. If you wanted to forward, Courtney Shaw at Northwestern's a really good one. She averaged 10 rebounds a game last year. But yeah, the Big Ten's a very talented conference. They're one of the best in all of women's basketball. So there's talented players throughout.
Yeah, I think if you kind of go the traditional route of a couple guards, a couple forwards, or 3 guards, a forward, and a center, it really kind of does make it tougher for some of those guards to make it. Whereas if you simply say, is it the 5 best players in the league? Then you put 4 guards on that team and you get into a little bit more of the discussion. I agree with you. The Big Ten is a very good league and there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of good guard talent. Obviously, we're biased toward Grace Berger, especially as a guard, but we're also, and Mackenzie Holmes. I will be interested to see what that matchup when it gets there. That we expect Mackenzie Holmes to be back to 100%. What will that matchup? She really struggled with Sonano last year, but that was coming back off the injury. Will a healthy Mackenzie Holmes be able to match up a little better one-on-one in that matchup? And maybe because Monica Sonano really hurt IU last year. So what do you think of Mackenzie Holmes's game? And I'll ask you also at the same time, what do you think of Grace Berger's game? And you've mentioned Sarah Scalia already.
Yeah, I think Mackenzie Holmes, it was hard for me to judge Mackenzie Holmes because she was coming off the injury the 2 times Iowa played him last year. But obviously a very talented player. The matchup with her and Sonano will be a good one in the 2 games that they play. I think for Monica, it's so hard to she's so good at scoring around the hoop that, she's going to get her points no matter what. But obviously anytime you run into a really talented player that's, up at the same level as her, it's going to be tougher for her. So, I mean, Mackenzie, there's things that Mackenzie will be able to do to potentially limit Monica. That should be one of the better matchups of the season, I would think, from a post standpoint. Grace Berger, another one, a really talented guard again, like we mentioned, one of the best in the Big Ten. And then Sarah Scally, like I keep mentioning, she's one that I think is going to be very good as well. But I mean, Grace Berger was a preseason All Big Ten selection. That's for a reason. Another matchup right there is Grace Berger and Caitlin Clark this year. I know Cardano Hillary did a really good job against Caitlin last year, trying to stop her. But yeah, I think Grace is up there for sure with the best in the Big Ten. Mackenzie is. I know I didn't mention Mackenzie when I was picking out my players. I forgot for her at forward. She's definitely one of the best in the Big Ten as well. So when Iowa and Indiana match up, there's gonna be a lot of really good matchups on the court, and that's what happens when 2 good teams play each other.
Yeah. And that's kind of the one thing that we've talked about off and on throughout the offseason, because we lost our best defender in Nicole Cardano-Hillary. Who guards Caitlin Clark? And is it more of a committee thing? I'm a big fan of kind of rotating people on her. Put Grace Berger on her for a little bit. Put a Sarah Scalia on her. Maybe not for very long, but just because listening, it sounds like if you can maybe, I hate to say run her down, but Caitlin's going to play a lot of minutes. Lisa's going to keep her out there for a lot of minutes especially in tough games. But you just want to kind of run defenders. I would have a big fan of running defenders at her. And we've got a freshman out of Israel, Jordan Garzon, who a lot of the fan base is very excited about. We have not seen her in a game yet, but based on what we've seen, some of the film out of Israel, she's got some size. Now, do you stick a true freshman on somebody like Caitlin Clark? Maybe not for very long, but like I said, I think that's going to, you talk about those 2 matchups, who guards Clark, who guards, and Mackenzie Holmes and Sonano. Like you said, to me, that's why 2 good teams get together and you expect a great game.
Yeah, I think you're kind of on with the fact of mixing people up on who's going to guard Caitlin. That can help you to an extent where if you can trust a Grace Berger or someone else to guard Caitlin and not get fouls elsewhere on the court, you can put Grace Berger on Caitlin and say, you can be a little physical with her. If you pick up a foul here, that's fine. But you'd have to trust her off of Caitlin. You can't pick up another foul over here, right? Because then you get into foul trouble. But if you mix players up and they're players that you trust to not get fouls off the ball, you can put someone on her and say, you got to go for 5 minutes, 10 minutes is all out on guarding her. And if you pick up a foul or 2, you're good. But I think that's the way to do it because as good as Caitlin is, if you mix defenders on her, you're going to get someone that's fresh on her as often as possible. And Caitlin's just herself. She's not switching herself out with 3 other people as well. So if you can always have a fresh defender on her, that's going to make it tougher on her. But I think you're onto something with that.
The last question I have for you, and I probably know the answer, but I want to give you a chance to answer it. And I'm sure most of our fans kind of have their ideas as well. Is this the last go around for Caitlin Clark in Iowa City?
I don't think so. I think she's planning on staying. This is her 3rd year, right? So she has another year left before she would be able to go to the WNBA. I think she's got a 5th year. I think she's gonna take it. Obviously that's a decision that still has to come. A year from now probably is when she'll start thinking about it. But I think the big thing for her is just the NIL deals that come out of college now. She's making a lot of money, and it's money that isn't necessarily going to come in from the WNBA because of the way their salaries are. They're just not as high as other sports. But yeah, I think she's thinking about it. I think a lot of people assume that she's going to be here for 2 years after this year yet, which obviously it would be great for Iowa. But yeah, I think I would lean right now that she's going to be here for 5 years, just because of the NIL opportunities. And you know, why not? If you're making money, you have a chance. Especially if they don't make a run in the tournament, she definitely wants that on her resume by the time she leaves Iowa. But yeah, I think she's going to be around for a while. Yeah.
And you bring up a great point. I had not thought of it that way about some of the NIL money, and in our chat, Ari is mentioning that as well, that he thinks maybe she sticks around for another year or two. What's kind of like at times here, if you listen to the IU fan base, and you know, kind of especially on the men's side, there's kind of an old school, no, NIL's horrible, and it's getting out of hand. It's almost free agency, because you see, especially on the guys' side, you see stories about, you know, basically recruits are being, you know, well, if you come here, we can get you this. You know, what's kind of the feeling among the fan base in Iowa?
You know, I wouldn't say that I read into a lot of what the fans say about NIL. I think the general consensus across all sports for Iowa fans is that, you know, if this is going to be a thing, I mean, you can't just disregard it. And I mean, even if you don't like NIL, if you're still a fan of Iowa, you know that to compete, you're gonna have to get into it at some point. I will say, like you mentioned, there's some things where it's really kind of towing the line between should they be allowed to do this or not, and especially on the men's side. I think for the most part, from what I've seen on the women's side, NIL is being handled the way that I thought it should have been handled, especially for someone like Caitlin Clark. I think it's being handled the way that people thought it would, where it's a player that's you know an All-American type player. They're getting, you know, these Nike deals, these Tops deals. She has a deal with Hy-Vee, and she's going out and she's doing things. I mean, she was at an IndyCar race this year in Newton, Iowa, because Hy-Vee was sponsoring it. So she's out in the community doing things with her NIL deals, which is really the way that I feel like it should be. If you're going to be getting paid, you should be out there doing it, not just this, oh, we're going to give you this NIL deal and here's a car because it's a car dealership type thing. So I would say for the most part on the women's side, I know Paige Beckers is another one that has a lot of NIL deals. I think they're doing it the way that a lot of people thought it would be. And sometimes on the men's side with football, and I know there's some in men's basketball too, where, you know, the NIL deal comes in, you're wondering, what are they really doing? Is this just a company giving them money? But yeah, like I said, I think the way that Caitlin's handling it is really the right way.
And I think the schools, you know, like here in IU, especially on the women's side, but in all the sports, the school can't funnel anything for them, obviously, but they're trying to educate them about the opportunities they have. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, you don't want, the thing that I always wonder with some of these players that are coming and getting, you know, some of these football players are getting like $1 million on these deals. You start to wonder, like, are they going to be fully in with this team still? I mean, if they're getting all this money, they're getting cars, they're getting things like that. Are they going to be fully in with the team? Or they may, hey, I've got $1 million, I can do whatever I want now. So yeah, I think that's the big thing is coaching staffs and compliance offices kind of educating players about, you know, here's what you should be doing. Here's the things that I would stay away from. Obviously, that doesn't always work, but I think like you mentioned, the women's side is doing a really good job with that because of most of the NIL deals that I've seen across women's sports have been, like I said, exactly the ones that I figured would happen with NIL.
And appearances. And I know, like, I did an interview show with Grace Berger last year, and we talked a little bit toward the end of the season about the NIL deals that she was able to sign and what all was entailing. She would have to make so many appearances and so many tweets that she had to make as far as in like hashtag the nonprofit or the company that she was with. So yeah, and I totally agree with you about Caitlin Clark and the ones you've seen in Iowa. That's what I think it should be. I agree with you wholeheartedly about that. Kyle, really want to thank you for being with us tonight. I really do, and you've been awesome as our first outside guest on the Doing the Work podcast here, part of the Back Home Network. I did have a question in our chat. Do you have a Twitter handle or social media where people can follow you?
Yeah, it's at Huesmann Kyle on Twitter. Yeah, it's just my last name and then my first name. It should be easy to find. Yeah, that's where I post all my basically anything for all my sports are going to be put out there. Women's basketball, baseball, and then field hockey is what we're in right now, but women's basketball starting up. So yeah, I welcome all followers. So yeah, at Huesmann Kyle on Twitter.
And we hope maybe you can join us again later in the season. Maybe as we get closer to the Iowa games, maybe you can come back and join us, or maybe even join us. We do generally, like for the Iowa games, we'll do a live post-game show afterwards. So maybe you could at least hop on and join us for a few minutes after one of those post-game shows, if at all possible. I know you have your responsibilities with Hawkeye Report and stuff, but we'd love to have you back.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for the game at Indiana. I still haven't decided if I'm going to be at that game, but if I'm still in Iowa or still here in Iowa, definitely hop on and talk about the end of the game. After the game in Iowa City, I'll be obviously busy with press conference and things like that. But if you guys were able to get me on after that one as well, I'd definitely like to talk about the game itself this year.
Yeah, and my co-host Kathy Amos, she's a Hoosier fan, she's a Hoosier gal, but she actually lives in Iowa, so we might get a chance for you to meet up with her, because she's actually got tickets for the game in Iowa City already, so she'll be at that game. So Kyle, any final thoughts you want to leave our fans with? For fans of Iowa fans who happen to hop on for the first time to Doing the Work, or for IU fans?
No, I mean, I'm happy that you had me on. It's good to be able to talk, not only just Iowa basketball, but the entire Big Ten. It was good to share some thoughts on some teams, and I'm happy that you asked for an outside opinion on stuff. But yeah, I think the season's gonna be great. Iowa and Indiana are gonna be two really good teams. I think they'll be right up there near the top of the Big Ten throughout the season. Then, I mean, the Big Ten tournament will be great as well. Obviously, the final last year was Iowa and Indiana, so they're gonna have two, maybe three again, maybe three really good matchups this year. So it should be a really fun season. I'm excited.
Yeah, I am too, and really looking forward to the season. And like you said, that's it. We really enjoyed having you on. And if we can help you in any way, just give us a shout out. Through Twitter or my email now. I think I even sent you an email. I was trying to find a way to get. I kept emailing. I kept trying to direct message you on Twitter, and my Twitter kept saying didn't go through. So you probably got like 6 of them. Like, why is this guy sending me 6? Because my Twitter said it wasn't sending. So I don't know. But I appreciate you coming on. We really do. Real quick, we want to remind our fans about some programming. We haven't decided when our next Doing the Work podcast is. Right now, we're thinking next week, but follow us on Doing the Work on our Twitter handle, and we'll post the schedule there. You also can see us on the Assembly Call community page. We'll post the schedule when we're there as well. You can follow us on Twitter at DTWIUWBB, which is Doing the Work. IU women basketball, short for that. And if you search on Twitter for Doing the Work, doing space work, you'll find us as well. All right. Or check out the Assembly Call community page. AC Radio is scheduled for their regular show tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central. Also, be sure to catch and subscribe to the next episode of Crimson Cast, a part of our Back Home Network family. And we again want to thank Kyle Huesmann of Hawkeye Report for joining us tonight. And next week, our next episode, Kathy will be back with us as well. I hope all of our workaholics in the chat enjoyed our conversation with Kyle Huesmann of Hawkeye Report tonight about the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Big Ten in general, and got his thoughts about the Indiana Hoosiers. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. Also, make sure you sign up for our free IU Hoops email newsletter. It goes out every Sunday after every men's basketball game. Join for free today at join.assemblycall.com. That's join.assemblycall.com. Special thanks to John Ringer of Rig Design for our logo that you see up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen if you're following us on YouTube. And thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU Hoops again with you soon. Until then, keep your elbows in, your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. All right. Thanks for joining us, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Appreciate everything. You were a great guest, and like I said, hope to have you back again sometime later in the season.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just let me know a time, and then hopefully it'll work into my schedule. But yeah, definitely after those 2 games this year, for sure. Let me know. Hopefully I can jump on and talk about those games.
All right. Hey, I'll let you go. Appreciate your time this evening.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks.